Damien Rousseau made one mistake when he left his bride to freeze to death. He assumed the snow would bury his secret with her. It almost did. By the time Luca Duca found Isabella Carter outside the abandoned chapel, fresh snow had already covered half her wedding dress. One heel was missing. Her veil had frozen against the rusted iron gate. Her dark hair was wet with melting snow, and clutched inside her trembling hand was something Damien Rousseau would kill to get back. Luca didn't see it at first. He saw only the woman, a beautiful plus-sized bride curled against the stone wall beside the chapel. Motionless, except for the faint rise and fall of her chest, for several seconds, Luca remained beside the black SUV, staring through the storm. Something about the scene felt wrong. There were no wedding guests, no photographers, no flowers scattered across the steps, no frantic family members searching for a missing bride. Only an abandoned chapel, fresh tire tracks, and a woman slowly disappearing beneath the snow. One of Luca's guards stepped forward. "Boss." Luca raised one hand. The man immediately fell silent. Luca's eyes remained fixed on the bride. He had survived long enough in Chicago's underworld because he had learned never to ignore the details that didn't belong. And nothing about this belonged. A bride didn't end up alone beside an isolated chapel during a blizzard by accident. Not dressed like that, not without a coat, not without a car, and certainly not when the woman beneath all that frozen lace belonged to one of the most dangerous men in Chicago. Luca crossed the road. Snow crushed beneath his polished black shoes. The wind pulled violently at his coat, but he barely noticed. His two guards followed several steps behind him, hands beneath their jackets, scanning the empty road and chapel windows. Luca didn't blame them. A woman lying conveniently beside a road could be bait. A wedding dress could hide a weapon. An abandoned chapel could hide 20 armed men. And Luca Duca had enemies who would gladly sacrifice an innocent woman for one clean shot at his head. He stopped several feet away. Nothing moved. Then the wind lifted the woman's veil. Luca saw her face and stopped. He knew her, not personally, but he had seen that face before at private dinners, in photographs, and most recently inside a file sitting on the desk in his study. Isabella Carter, the daughter of Richard Carter, the woman whose engagement had become one of Chicago's favorite pieces of society gossip, and the woman who less than an hour ago was supposed to become Mrs. Damien Rousseau. Luca's expression hardened. Of all the women he could have found half dead in the snow, it had to be her, Damien Rousseau's bride. The bride of the man Luca had spent years preparing to destroy. Luca looked toward the chapel. The massive wooden doors were closed. He looked toward the road. Several sets of tire tracks cut through the snow before disappearing toward the highway. Whoever had been here had left quickly. Luca crouched. Isabella. Nothing. He pulled off one leather glove and pressed 2 fingers against the side of her neck. There, a pulse. Weak. Too weak. He touched her cheek. Ice cold. Luca's jaw tightened. This wasn't someone who had stepped outside 5 minutes ago after an argument. She had been here for a while, long enough for snow to collect across the folds of her dress, long enough for the expensive ivory fabric to become stiff, long enough for her lips to lose their natural color. Someone had left her here and hadn't come back. Luca glanced toward one of his guards. "Check the chapel." The man moved immediately. Luca turned back to Isabella. There was something about seeing Damien Rousseau's bride like this that disturbed him more than it should have. He hated Damien. That hatred was old, patient, personal. But Isabella wasn't Damien. Whatever arrangement had brought her to that chapel, whatever promises Damien had made her, She didn't deserve to become another casualty in a war she hadn't started. Luca reached toward her. Then Isabella moved, barely. Her fingers twitched against the snow. Her eyelids fluttered. Luca leaned closer. Isabella. Her eyes opened only halfway. Confusion moved through them first, then fear. Not the startled fear of waking beside a stranger. Something deeper. Something already there before she saw him. Her hand suddenly shot upward and closed around Luca's wrist. The movement was weak, but desperate. Luca looked down at her fingers. She was holding him as though letting go meant death. Her lips moved. No sound came out. Luca lowered his head. "What?" Isabella swallowed painfully. Then finally, 4 broken words escaped her. "Don't let him find me." Luca went completely still. The storm howled around them. Behind him, one of his guards shifted. Luca barely heard it. His attention remained on Isabella. Don't let him find me. There was only one man she could mean. Damien. Luca's eyes narrowed. This wasn't an abandoned bride begging for her fiancé to come back. She was terrified he might. Isabella. Her eyes were already closing. Luca caught her face gently. "What happened?" She tried to answer. Her lips parted. "Nothing." "Why did Damien leave you here?" That got a reaction. A small one. But Luca saw it. Fear flashed through her eyes again. Then her hand slipped from his wrist. Her head rolled weakly against the stone. She was unconscious. Luca stared at her. Something had changed. 5 minutes earlier, he'd believed Damien had simply abandoned his bride. Cruel, but understandable for a man like Russo. Now Luca knew better. Isabella hadn't been waiting for Damien. She had been hiding from him, and that made the entire scene far more dangerous. Footsteps approached quickly through the snow. One of Luca's guards returned from the chapel. Empty. Luca looked up. Signs of a struggle. The guard hesitated inside. Yes, that was all Luca needed. He looked down at Isabella again. Her breathing was becoming shallower. Questions could wait. Keeping her alive couldn't. Luca reached beneath her knees. That was when he noticed her right hand. It was clenched tightly against her waist, too tightly for someone unconscious. Luca frowned. Something black was visible between her fingers. He carefully opened them. Isabella resisted, even unconscious, her frozen fingers curling around the object, as though some final instinct was telling her never to release it. Eventually, Luca saw what she was holding. A small black envelope. No address, no name. Only a symbol stamped into the wax seal. Luca's entire expression changed. He knew that symbol. He had seen it twice before. Once in a photograph recovered from a dead accountant's apartment, and once on a document Luca had spent nearly 3 years trying to locate. 3 years. 3 years of bribes, threats, missing money, dead informants, men who suddenly disappeared whenever Luca's investigation got too close, and every trail had eventually led back to the same man. Damien Russo. Luca stared at the envelope, then at Isabella. Suddenly, everything made sense, and nothing made sense at all. Why would Damien's bride have this? Had she stolen it? Had someone given it to her? Did Damien know she had it? And if he did, was that why she had been left here? One of Luca's guards saw the change in his face. "Boss." Luca closed, Isabella's fingers around the envelope again. "Nobody touches this." The guard nodded. Luca removed his heavy coat and wrapped it around Isabella's shoulders. He lifted her carefully. Her body felt frighteningly cold against him. For a brief moment, her head rested against his chest. The sight would have been almost absurd under different circumstances. Luca Duca carrying Damian Russo's bride through the snow on what should have been her wedding day. But Luca wasn't thinking about humiliation. He wasn't thinking about revenge. Not yet. He was thinking about the envelope. He was thinking about the fear in Isabella's eyes, and those 4 words, "Don't let him find me." His guard opened the SUV door. Luca stopped before climbing inside. There was an obvious choice. Take Isabella to the nearest hospital, contact her family, then walk away. Whatever secret she had stolen from Damian wasn't Luca's responsibility. But Luca knew Damian Russo. If Damian wanted that envelope badly enough to leave his own bride in a snowstorm, a public hospital wouldn't protect her, neither would her father. And if Damian discovered Isabella had survived, he would come looking. Luca looked down at her. He could use that. He could call Damian himself, tell him exactly who had found his missing bride, offer an exchange. Isabella and the envelope. For everything Luca had spent years trying to uncover, it would be cold, efficient, strategic, exactly the kind of decision everyone expected from Luca Duca. But Isabella shifted faintly inside his arms. Her fingers caught the front of his shirt. Even unconscious, she held on. Luca stared at that hand. Then something inside him settled. Decision made. "Boss?" his guard asked. "Which hospital?" Luca looked toward the empty road, then back at the abandoned chapel. His voice was quiet. "Certain. No hospital." The guard frowned. "Then where?" Luca lowered his eyes to the woman in his arms. Damian Russo had left Isabella Carter in the cold, believing the storm would finish whatever he had started. He believed his bride would disappear. He believed his secret would disappear with her, and most importantly, he believed no one powerful enough to challenge him would ever know what happened here. He was wrong. Luca stepped into the SUV with Isabella still against his chest. "My estate." The guards stared at him for half a second before shutting the door. The convoy pulled away. Behind them, the chapel disappeared into the storm, and Isabella Carter disappeared with Luca Duca. By sunrise, Damian Russo would learn that his bride was not dead. Soon after, he would discover who had her. But the thing that would truly terrify him wasn't that Luca Duca had found his bride. It was that Luca had found the secret she was carrying, because Damian Russo had left Isabella in the cold, believing she would die with it. He had no idea that the most dangerous man in Chicago had just saved both. The gates of the Duca estate opened before the convoy slowed. By the time the first SUV reached the circular drive, Luca had already made 3 decisions. No hospital, no police, and absolutely no word that Isabella Carter was alive. The 4th decision came when one of his men reached for the black envelope still trapped beneath Isabella's fingers. Luca's gaze stopped him. "Leave it." The guard immediately withdrew his hand. Luca stepped from the SUV, with Isabella still in his arms. Snow had gathered across his shoulders during the short walk from the chapel, but Isabella was wrapped almost completely inside his coat now. Only the bottom of her ruined wedding dress showed beneath it. Under the bright lights of the estate entrance, she looked worse. Her face had lost almost all its color. Wet strands of dark hair clung to her cheeks. And every few seconds, a faint tremor moved through her body. Luca carried her through the enormous front doors. The house had been quiet when he left that afternoon. Now it erupted into controlled movement. His housekeeper hurried forward. A guard was already calling Luca's private physician. Another man disappeared toward the east wing to prepare a room. Nobody asked why their boss had returned, carrying a half-frozen bride. People who worked for Luca Duca understood that questions were asked when Luca wanted answers, not when he was still deciding what the questions were. He carried Isabella upstairs himself. That surprised everyone. It surprised Luca, too. He could have handed her to one of his men the moment they reached the estate. He didn't. Something about the way her fingers remained tangled in his shirt made him unwilling to let anyone else touch her. Even unconscious, she still hadn't released the envelope. 20 minutes later, Dr. Marcus Hale arrived. Luca remained outside the guest bedroom while Isabella's ruined wedding dress was removed, and her body was gradually warmed. The doctor had warned them against trying to heat her too quickly, so Luca waited. And while he waited, he began investigating. His head of security, Marco Bellini, entered the study carrying a tablet. The information was already spreading. Damian Russo and Isabella Carter's wedding had been scheduled for 3 that afternoon at St. Augustine's Chapel. Nearly 80 guests had been invited, but the ceremony had never happened. More interestingly, there was already a story circulating about why. According to Damian's people, Isabella had disappeared before the wedding. She had supposedly panicked, run away, humiliated Damian in front of his associates. Luca slowly looked up from the tablet. That story had been circulating before he found her, which meant Damian hadn't simply abandoned Isabella. He had prepared the lie afterward, perhaps even beforehand. Luca's attention returned to the security photograph taken outside the chapel. Tire tracks, multiple vehicles, enough cars to suggest people had definitely been there. But according to Damian, the bride had vanished. Luca leaned back. Interesting, because Isabella hadn't vanished. She had been left 30 yards from the chapel doors without a coat in weather cold enough to kill her. And she had been carrying something Damian desperately wanted hidden. The pieces were beginning to form a picture. Luca simply didn't know what the picture showed yet. A knock interrupted his thoughts. The doctor entered. She'll live. Luca's expression didn't change, but something in his shoulders loosened barely. The doctor explained that Isabella had severe hypothermia, dehydration, and bruising around one wrist. There were no broken bones, and no obvious serious internal injuries. The bruising interested Luca. Someone had grabbed her hard. How long was she outside? Impossible to know exactly. Another hour might have changed the outcome. Another hour. Luca stared toward the fire. If his convoy had taken another road, if he hadn't noticed the white fabric, if he had decided it wasn't his problem, Isabella Carter would have been dead before morning, and Damian's story about his runaway bride would have become the truth everyone remembered. Luca dismissed the doctor and returned upstairs. He stopped outside Isabella's room. He had no reason to enter. She was alive. That was enough. At least it should have been. Then he remembered the envelope. Luca opened the door. The room was warm. A fire burned low in the hearth. Isabella lay beneath thick blankets. Her dark hair spread across the pillow. Someone had changed her into a simple cream nightgown. Her wedding dress was gone, but the envelope remained. It sat on the bedside table. Luca approached it. For the first time, he could study the seal properly, a black circle crossed by 3 diagonal lines. Most people would have seen nothing important. Luca saw 3 years of blood. The first time he had encountered that symbol was after an accountant named Victor Cerno had been found dead inside his apartment. Officially suicide. Luca had never believed it. Cerno had worked indirectly for Damian Russo. More importantly, 48 hours before his death, Cerno had contacted one of Luca's men, claiming he possessed records capable of destroying Damien's organization from the inside. The meeting never happened. Cerno died. The records disappeared, but a photograph recovered from his phone showed one corner of a black envelope bearing that exact symbol. The second time Luca saw it was 6 months later. A shipping manifest. Different company, different city, same mark. After that, nothing. Until tonight, Luca reached toward the envelope, then stopped. Isabella's voice returned to him. Don't let him find me. Not it. Me. Whatever was inside that envelope mattered. But Isabella knew something, too, perhaps more than the envelope could ever tell him. Luca withdrew his hand. He would wait. That surprised him more than anything. The Luca Duca people feared would have opened it immediately. But the woman lying in that bed had nearly died protecting it. He wanted to hear why from her first. Luca pulled a chair toward the window and sat. He told himself he was guarding the envelope. 2 hours later, he was still there. Near midnight, Isabella began to move. At first, Luca thought she was waking. Then he heard her breathing change. Fast, shallow. Her head moved against the pillow. No. Luca straightened. Isabella's fingers tightened around the blanket. No, please. Her voice was weak. Luca moved toward the bed. Her eyes remained closed. She was dreaming or remembering. Damien, don't. Luca stopped. Isabella jerked suddenly, as though someone had grabbed her. Then came another word, one Luca wasn't expecting. Ledger. His gaze shifted immediately toward the envelope. Oh. Isabella's breathing became frantic. He'll kill. She woke. Her eyes flew open. For several seconds, she didn't know where she was. Then she saw Luca standing beside the bed. Fear flooded her face. She scrambled backward. Easy. Her gaze swept across the unfamiliar room. The fireplace, the expensive furniture, the locked windows. Then Luca. Recognition arrived, and with it a different kind of fear. Luca, Duca. It wasn't a question. Luca watched her carefully. You remember me? Isabella did. Fragments returned. Snow the chapel. Hands lifting her. A black SUV. Then the envelope. Her head snapped toward the bedside table. It was there. Her entire body relaxed for half a second. Luca noticed. You nearly died protecting that. Isabella looked at him, then at the envelope. Her expression closed. Luca understood immediately. She wasn't going to tell him. Not yet. So he gave her something instead. Damien says you ran away. Isabella froze. Luca continued. He's already telling Chicago you disappeared before the ceremony. Something changed in her face. Not surprise. Recognition, as though she had expected it. That interested Luca far more. You knew he would say that. Isabella looked toward the fire. For several seconds, neither spoke. Then she asked the question Luca had been waiting for. Does Mian know I'm alive? No. Her eyes returned to his. Keep it that way. And suddenly, Luca understood something important. Isabella Carter wasn't simply frightened. She was planning, even half frozen. Even trapped inside the home of a mafia boss, she had every reason to distrust. She was thinking ahead. Luca looked toward the black envelope. Whatever happened at that chapel, Isabella wasn't ready to tell him. That was fine. Luca Duca had built his empire on patience. He could wait. But elsewhere in Chicago, Damian Russo wasn't feeling patient at all. Shortly after midnight, One of Damien's men returned to the chapel. The snow had almost erased everything. Almost. The bride was gone. There was no body beside the gate, no envelope, and beneath the fresh snow, there were tire tracks that didn't belong to Damien's convoy. The man took photographs. 20 minutes later, they reached Damien. He studied them in silence, then enlarged one image, a tire print, large SUV, specialized winter tread. Damien knew only a handful of men in Chicago whose security convoys used that particular vehicle. His face slowly changed, because if the man he suspected had found Isabella, then losing his bride was the least of his problems. By morning, the storm had weakened. Chicago woke beneath a blanket of white, and Isabella Carter woke inside the home of the man Damien Rousseau hated most. For several minutes, she remained still. Her body hurt. Her fingers burned as sensation returned. Her throat felt raw. But she was alive. That fact alone felt impossible. She remembered the chapel more clearly now. She remembered Damien's face, the shouting, the moment everything changed, and she remembered running. Isabella closed her eyes. She wasn't ready to revisit the rest. A tray of food arrived shortly after 8. She barely touched it. Her attention remained on the black envelope. It had not been opened. That bothered her, not because she wanted Luca to open it, because she couldn't understand why he hadn't. Damien would have torn it from her hands. Her father would have asked how much it was worth. Luca Duca had apparently placed it beside her bed and waited. That made him harder to understand, and therefore more dangerous. When Luca entered later that morning, Isabella was sitting near the window, wearing a robe provided by the housekeeper. He stopped when he saw her standing. "You should be in bed. I've spent enough time helpless." Luca said nothing, but he understood the sentence wasn't really about the bed. Isabella noticed he was dressed differently from the night before. Dark trousers, white shirt, sleeves folded once at the wrists. No jacket. Nothing about him looked hurried. That disturbed her too. Damien had always needed people to see his power. Luca didn't. The house did it for him. The guards outside. The silence when he entered a room. The fact that nobody interrupted him. Isabella had heard stories about Luca Duca for years. Some were probably exaggerated. Some, she suspected, weren't exaggerated enough. And now she was inside his home, carrying evidence against his greatest enemy. Luca placed a folder on the table. Isabella looked at it. "What's that? Your wedding?" She didn't touch it. Luca opened it himself. Photographs, vehicle records, phone records, information gathered overnight. Isabella's face tightened as she looked through them. Luca watched rather than questioned her. Eventually, her eyes stopped on a photograph of Damien leaving the chapel. The timestamp was 3:47 p.m. Isabella stared at it. Her fingers tightened around the edge of the page. Luca noticed that time means something. She remained silent. "Isabella," her eyes lifted. "I was still inside the chapel at 3:47. There it was. The first crack." Luca sat opposite her. According to Damien's public story, Isabella had vanished before 3:30. But Isabella had just placed herself inside the chapel 17 minutes later, which meant someone was lying, and Luca already knew who. He didn't push too hard. Instead, he waited. Eventually, Isabella began telling him pieces. Not everything. The wedding had started normally. Her father had been nervous. Damien had been distracted. Shortly before the ceremony, Isabella went looking for him. She heard voices coming from a private office behind the chapel. Damien was arguing with another man. She hadn't intended to listen. Then she heard her father's name. Isabella stopped speaking. Luca's expression sharpened. "What about your father?" Her hesitation answered before her words did. Damien hadn't planned to save Richard Carter from his debts. He had planned to take control of Carter Logistics immediately after marrying Isabella. The company possessed warehouses, trucking contracts, and access to several freight terminals. Perfect infrastructure for legitimate commerce. Even better infrastructure for moving things that customs officials weren't supposed to see. Isabella had discovered that the marriage was never about combining families. She was the key Damien needed to get inside her family's company without starting a war with its remaining investors. But even that wasn't what terrified her. The conversation had continued. Damien mentioned payments, names, judges, police officers, businesses, men who had disappeared. Then the second man gave Damien a black envelope. Isabella had heard enough to understand that whatever was inside, it could expose far more than illegal shipments. It could expose an entire network. Then the chapel floor creaked beneath her heel. Damien heard it. Isabella stopped. Even now, safe inside Luca's estate. Her breathing changed. Luca noticed. He didn't interrupt. Damien opened the door. He saw her, and for perhaps the first time during their entire engagement, Isabella saw the man beneath the charm. He wasn't embarrassed. He wasn't worried. He was calculating how much she had heard. Damien grabbed her wrist. The bruises Luca's doctor had found. Isabella managed to pull free when voices approached from the main chapel. In the confusion, the envelope ended up within her reach. She took it, not because she had some brilliant plan, because she suddenly understood that if she walked out of that room empty-handed, Damien could deny everything. The envelope was a leverage. Insurance may be the only reason he wouldn't hurt her. She had been wrong. Damien ordered the wedding postponed. Guests were told there had been a family emergency. Then Isabella was dragged through a side exit. Luca's face became colder with every word. What happened outside? Isabella looked at him and stopped talking. That part she wouldn't give him. Not yet. Luca didn't force it. Instead, he looked toward the black envelope. "So, you stole it. I survived with it." The distinction wasn't lost on him. Luca rose. He crossed the room and picked up the envelope. Isabella immediately tensed. Luca saw it. He held it toward her instead. She stared. "You haven't opened it?" "No. Why?" Luca's answer was simple. "It's yours until you decide otherwise." Isabella looked at him as though he had spoken a language she didn't understand. Damien had spent months deciding things for her. Her father had decided she would marry Damien. Her family's lawyers had decided what she would receive. Society had decided what a woman like Isabella Carter should be grateful to have. And Luca Duca, the supposedly ruthless criminal sitting across from her, was giving her a choice. Isabella took the envelope. For the first time since waking, some of the fear left her face. But Luca wasn't finished. "There is something you need to understand." She waited. "Damien knows someone took you." Her fingers tightened. "He doesn't know it was me yet, but he will." Isabella's face lost color. Luca continued calmly. "When he discovers you're alive, he won't come because he wants his bride back." His eyes dropped to the envelope. "He'll come for that." Isabella already knew. The difference was hearing Luca say it aloud. For years, Luca had wanted something capable of bringing Darmen Russo down. Now, it was sitting less than 6 FT away from him. Yet, he had handed it back. That made Isabella ask a question she had been avoiding. "Why do you hate him?" Luca's expression changed very slightly, but she saw it. The answer lived somewhere painful. Years earlier, Luca's younger brother, Gabriel, had entered a business arrangement with Damien. Damien betrayed him. Information about a supposedly secure meeting was sold to a rival crew. Gabriel walked into an ambush. He never walked out. Damien denied involvement. There had never been enough evidence to prove it. But Luca had spent years following the money. Every trail led back to Damien. Luca didn't need a confession anymore. He wanted destruction. Slow, complete, permanent. Isabella looked down at the envelope in her hands. Now she understood why fate, putting it in Luca's path, was so dangerous. She possessed something he had spent years searching for. And Luca possessed something Damien now wanted just as badly. Her. Before either could speak again, Marco appeared at the doorway. He didn't enter immediately. That alone told Luca something was wrong. Boss. Luca stood. Marco handed him a phone. A photograph filled the screen. Luca carrying Isabella through the snow. It had been taken from a distance. The image was grainy but recognizable. Isabella saw it over his shoulder. Her stomach dropped. Someone had been watching the chapel. Below the photograph was a message. Only one sentence. You have something that belongs to me. Isabella stared at it. The room suddenly felt colder than the chapel. Luca didn't. He looked almost bored. Then another message arrived. This time, a photograph. Isabella's father, leaving his home that morning, unaware he was being followed. Isabella stood so quickly that the chair scraped backward. Damien hadn't threatened Luca. He had threatened her. Luca's eyes moved from the photograph to Isabella. He could see panic beginning to rise. And he could also see exactly what Damien expected her to do. Run, beg, trade the envelope, return willingly if necessary. Luca took the phone from Marco. Double security around her father and sister. Quietly, Marco left. Isabella stared at Luca. You'd protect them. They're being threatened because you're under my roof. That wasn't the entire truth. Luca knew it. Isabella probably did too, but neither challenged it. Outside the estate gates, another black vehicle had already appeared at the end of the road. It didn't approach. It simply waited, watching. Luca walked toward the window. The old war with Damian Russo had changed overnight. For years, it had been about Gabriel, about revenge, about destroying the man responsible for his brother's death. Now, Damien had made a mistake. He had brought Isabella's family into it. Luca looked back at the woman, standing beside the table, still pale, still recovering, still holding the black envelope against her chest. Damien believed Luca had found his weakness. He was wrong. Luca had found Damien's. And before this was over, Chicago was going to learn exactly what had happened inside that chapel. But Isabella still hadn't told Luca the most important part. She had told him why she took the envelope. She had told him what she overheard. She had even told him how Damien caught her. But she had not told him what happened afterward, or why Damien had left her outside to die, instead of simply taking the envelope back, because there was something inside that chapel Luca didn't know. Something Isabella had seen just before Damien ordered everyone to leave. And if Luca discovered that, the black envelope would become the second most dangerous secret Isabella Carter was carrying. The black vehicle remained outside the Duca estate for 11 minutes. It never crossed the gates, never flashed its lights, never attempted to hide. That was the point. Damien wanted Isabella to know he had found her. Luca stood at the upstairs window. watching until the vehicle finally reversed onto the snow-covered road and disappeared. He didn't order his men to follow it. That surprised Isabella. She had expected anger, orders, perhaps retaliation before the car even reached the highway. Instead, Luca simply closed the curtain. Men like Damien threatened loudly when they wanted fear. Men like Luca became quiet when they were deciding what to do with it. Isabella preferred the shouting. The silence was much more frightening. Within an hour, security around the estate doubled. 2 men were placed discreetly near her father's home. Another team was sent to watch her younger sister, Emily, without frightening her. Luca had every vehicle entering the estate checked twice. Isabella watched all of it happen because of her. That realization carried its own weight. She had spent most of her life being treated as an obligation. Her father's daughter. The woman expected to rescue the Carter family through marriage, Damien's future wife. Someone whose value had always been attached to what she could provide for somebody else. Now Luca was spending money, manpower, and influence protecting people he had never met, and asking for nothing in return. It made trusting him more dangerous because Isabella was beginning to want to, and she still hadn't told him everything. That afternoon, Luca summoned Marco to his study. The black envelope lay unopened on the desk between them. Isabella had returned it to Luca temporarily after Damien's message, but she had made one condition clear. It remained sealed until she was present. Luca had agreed. Marco had discovered something else. Damien's story was changing. The previous night, Isabella had supposedly run away before the ceremony. By morning, Damien's people were claiming she had stolen money before disappearing. By afternoon, another rumor had appeared. Isabella had been secretly involved with Luca Duca before her wedding. That one made Luca smile. Not because it amused him, because it told him Damien was frightened. A frightened man rarely told one lie. He told 5, hoping nobody noticed they contradicted each other. But there was a more important discovery. Security footage from a gas station 6 miles from the chapel had captured Damien's convoy. 4 vehicles all traveling together. The timestamp was 4:12 p.m. Isabella had been found much later. Luca studied the footage. One vehicle bothered him. A grey sedan. It entered the gas station behind Damien's convoy, but left in the opposite direction. Marco had enhanced the image enough to identify the license plate. The vehicle belonged to Richard Carter, Isabella's father. Luca's eyes hardened. According to Isabella, her father had been inside the chapel. According to the photograph, Richard Carter had left the area with Damien, and according to Isabella's account, she had been left behind. Luca said nothing, not yet. He wanted facts before accusations, especially accusations involving the father of the woman sleeping under his roof. But the discovery planted a question Luca couldn't ignore. Had Richard Carter believed his daughter escaped? Or had he known exactly where she was? Isabella came downstairs that evening. The doctor had ordered rest. She had ignored him. Luca found her standing inside the library, staring through tall windows at the snow-covered grounds. She wore a dark green dress borrowed from one of Luca's relatives, who occasionally stayed at the estate. It fit imperfectly around her curves, but Isabella seemed grateful simply to be out of the nightgown. The black envelope was in her hand. Luca entered without announcing himself. She sensed him anyway. It's time. Luca understood. They went to his study. Marco remained outside. Luca closed the door. For several seconds, Isabella stared at the envelope. She had nearly died for whatever was inside. Now she seemed afraid to discover whether it had been worth it. Finally, she broke the seal. Inside were no photographs, no confessions, No dramatic list of murdered men. There were 6 pieces of paper. Numbers, dates, company names, bank transfers, initials. At first glance, almost meaningless. Then Luca saw one name, Carter Logistics. Isabella saw it too. Her stomach tightened. Another company appeared beneath it. Then another. Luca recognized several as businesses secretly controlled by Damien. Money had moved between them for years. Millions. The transactions were disguised as shipping fees, consulting payments, insurance settlements, and warehouse leases. But Luca understood laundering when he saw it. Isabella's family company had been part of Damien's network long before their engagement. She stared at the page. My father didn't know. Luca didn't answer. That frightened her. He couldn't have. Luca remained quiet. Isabella looked up. You think he did? I think we don't know enough. It wasn't the reassurance she wanted, but it was the truth. Luca continued reading. Near the bottom of the final page was a set of initials, GD. Luca stopped. For the first time since opening the envelope, his composure cracked barely, but Isabella saw it. What? Luca didn't answer immediately. Gabriel Duca, his younger brother, the man Damien's betrayal had killed. Beside Gabriel's initials was a date, the date of the ambush, and beside that, a payment, 750,000. Luca stared at the number. For years, he'd known Damien was responsible. He simply couldn't prove how. Now he was looking at what appeared to be payment connected to his brother's death. Isabella watched Luca's hand flatten against the desk. His face became almost emotionless. That was worse than rage. She understood why the envelope mattered. Now, this wasn't simply evidence against Damien's businesses. It could be evidence that someone had been paid to betray Gabriel Duca. Luca carefully folded the papers. He didn't break anything, didn't shout, didn't threaten anyone. He simply put everything back inside the envelope. Then he walked to the window. Isabella remained behind him. For the first time, she saw Luca not as Chicago's feared Mafia boss, but as an older brother who had spent years carrying a dead man's unanswered questions. And suddenly, the secret she had kept from him felt heavier because she knew something about that payment. Something she had heard inside the chapel. Something she had been too frightened to repeat. Luca turned. There's more. Isabella's heart stopped. He had seen it on her face. She looked away. Luca approached slowly. What happened after Damien caught you? Isabella's fingers curled against the edge of the desk. She couldn't answer. Not because she feared Damien anymore, because the truth could destroy what remained of her family. Luca studied her. Then he did something she hadn't expected. He backed away. I won't force it out of you. Isabella looked at him. But when you're ready to tell me, don't lie. He left. The door closed quietly behind him, and Isabella stood alone beside the evidence that could finally avenge Luca's brother. She wanted to call him back. She almost did, but she couldn't because the words Damien had spoken inside that chapel were still burned into her memory. Words Luca had never heard. Gabriel Duca hadn't been betrayed by Damien alone. Someone else had helped him. Someone whose name Isabella recognized. The following morning, Luca received another message. Not from Damien, from Isabella's father. Richard Carter wanted to see his daughter alone. Luca refused. Richard insisted. Then he said something that changed everything. He knew what Isabella had taken from the chapel, and if Luca wanted to understand what the documents really meant, he needed to hear the truth before Damien reached him first. Richard Carter arrived at the Duca estate shortly before noon. He looked nothing like the wealthy businessman whose photographs appeared in Chicago society magazines. His expensive coat was wrinkled. His face looked older. And when Luca's guards searched him at the entrance, he didn't protest. Fear had stripped away his pride. Isabella watched her father enter the drawing room. For one terrible moment, she wanted to run to him. Then she remembered the chapel, the convoy leaving, the snow. Her father wasn't supposed to have been part of Damien's convoy, yet Luca had proof his car left the area. Richard looked at his daughter. Relief crossed his face. Then shame. That told Isabella more than she wanted to know. You knew. Richard stopped. Luca stood several feet away. He didn't interfere. This belonged to Isabella. Her father lowered his eyes, and the truth finally began coming out. Richard Carter's financial problems had started years earlier. Carter Logistics had been failing long before Isabella knew. Bad investments, loans, contracts lost to competitors. Richard had borrowed money to keep the company alive. Eventually, he borrowed from Damien Rousseau. At first, the arrangement looked legitimate. Then Damien began using Carter warehouses for shipments Richard wasn't allowed to inspect. By the time Richard understood what was happening, he was already trapped. Damien possessed signed documents capable of sending him to prison. The marriage to Isabella was supposed to erase the debt. At least that was what Richard told himself. In reality, Richard had traded his daughter's future for his own survival. Isabella listened without crying. That frightened her father more than tears would have, but Luca was listening for something else. Gabriel. Richard hesitated. Years earlier, Damien had needed information about a Duca meeting. A location, a time, a route. Richard had access to freight records connected to the warehouse where the meeting was supposed to happen. Damien paid him for the information. Richard claimed he didn't know anyone would die. Luca's face changed. The room seemed to shrink. Isabella finally understood the initials, the payment, the secret. Her father had helped Damien set up the ambush that killed Luca's younger brother. Richard began explaining. Luca didn't move. That made the scene terrifying. One command from him, and Richard Carter might never leave the estate. Isabella stepped between them. Not because her father deserved protection, because she knew what killing him would do to Luca. It would give Damien another victory. Richard had information. Names, accounts, witnesses. If Luca wanted to destroy Damien completely, Richard could help. Luca stared past Isabella, at the man responsible for helping create the worst day of his life. Every instinct told him to finish it there. But Isabella was standing between them. The woman Damien had left to die, protecting the father who had helped sell her into that marriage. Not because she was weak, because she was thinking beyond revenge. Luca finally ordered his men to take Richard somewhere secure. Not a cell, not freedom either. He would remain protected until Luca verified everything. Richard didn't argue. Before leaving, he looked at Isabella. She couldn't look back. When the door closed, her strength disappeared. She turned away from Luca. For days, she had been holding herself together through anger. Now the anger had nowhere to go. Her own father had helped Damien destroy Luca's brother. Then, years later, he had agreed to give Damien his daughter. Isabella felt contaminated by all of it. Luca approached. She expected accusation. Instead, he told her something simple. You didn't do what he did. That nearly broke her. Isabella had spent her entire life carrying consequences created by other people. Her father's debts, Damien's ambitions. Now, Gabriel's death. Luca refused to add that weight to her for the first time since the chapel. Isabella cried quietly. Luca didn't tell her to stop. He didn't make promises. He simply remained beside her until she could breathe again. And something between them changed. Not romance. Not yet. Something more dangerous. Trust. But Damien didn't give them time to understand it. By evening, photographs of Isa entering Luca's estate had been sent to several journalists and gossip accounts. The story spread quickly. Runaway bride hiding with Damien Russo's enemy. Another claimed Isabella had been Luca's mistress. Another claimed the entire abandoned wedding had been planned. Damien was rewriting history in real time. And he wasn't finished. Carter Logistics creditors suddenly demanded immediate repayment. Banks froze accounts. Business partners withdrew. Employees began receiving anonymous warnings. Damien was destroying Isabella's family company, piece by piece. Luca understood the strategy. Damien couldn't reach Isabella physically, so he would strip away everything around her until she had no choice but to leave Luca's protection. It was clever. It might have worked if Isabella had been alone. She wasn't. That night, Luca called his attorneys. By morning, several Carter debts had quietly changed hands. The new creditor was a Duca-controlled company. Damien's financial pressure stopped almost instantly. But Luca knew that was temporary. Damien would find another angle. Isabella found Luca in his study after midnight. The envelope sat inside a locked evidence case now. She had learned what Luca had done for Carter Logistics. You bought the debt. Some of it? Why? Luca looked at her. The practical answer was obvious. Keeping Carter Logistics alive denied Damien control of its warehouses. Protecting Isabella's family kept her from being forced back toward him. It was strategy, but they both knew strategy wasn't the entire reason anymore. Isabella walked toward the desk. What happens when Damien realizes he can't force me back? He escalates. And when he escalates, I stop him. Simple? Certain. But Isabella had learned enough about Damien to know there would always be another threat. Her father, her sister, the company, her reputation. As long as she remained Damien Russo's abandoned bride, he could continue treating her as unfinished business. Then Luca said something unexpected. There is another way. Isabella looked at him. Luca had been considering it since the previous night. It was ruthless, calculated, and potentially disastrous. But it would change Isabella's position overnight. Damien had built his public attack around one idea. Isabella belonged to him. His runaway bride, his disgraced fiancée, his property to reclaim. Luca could destroy that narrative with a single move. Marry me? Silence. Isabella stared at him. Of everything she had expected, that wasn't it. Luca didn't dress the proposal in romance. He explained it exactly as he had calculated it. As Luca Duca's wife, Isabella would come under the full protection of his name. Her family's remaining legitimate assets could be secured. Her sister could be protected independently of Richard. Damien's claim over Isabella would become ridiculous. And most importantly, the woman he abandoned would become the wife of the man he feared most. It would humiliate him. Isabella understood immediately. So I'm revenge. Luca didn't lie. At first, his honesty startled her. Then he continued. You would also be protected. Isabella almost laughed. She had heard that promise before. Damien had promised protection. Her father had promised security. Both had really meant control. So Isabella gave Luca conditions. Her sister's trust would belong to her sister alone. Richard would never again control Isabella's money. Carter Logistics would eventually return to legitimate operation if it survived, and Isabella would never be treated as Luca's possession. Not publicly, not privately. Luca agreed to everything. No negotiation. That unsettled her. Why? Luca looked at the woman Damien had left freezing outside a chapel. Because somewhere between finding her in the snow and discovering the truth about his brother, revenge had stopped being the only reason he wanted her beneath his roof. He didn't tell her that. Not yet. Instead, he slid a blank legal pad toward her. Add whatever else you need. Isabella stared at it. That was the difference. Damien had handed her a future already written. Luca was handing her the pen. 3 days later, Chicago's most powerful people received an invitation none of them expected. There would be no enormous ceremony, no public spectacle, only a private wedding at the Duca estate. By sunset, Isabella Carter stood before a mirror, wearing another white dress. But everything was different. The first dress had been chosen to satisfy Damien's family. This one, Isabella chose herself. It followed her curves elegantly instead of trying to hide them. No suffocating corset, no enormous veil, no attempt to make her smaller. She looked at her reflection. For a moment, she remembered the snow, her frozen fingers, the chapel wall against her back. Damien leaving. Then the door opened behind her. Luca stood there. Black suit, white shirt, no smile. But when he saw her, he stopped. For once, Luca Duca had no immediate response. Isabella noticed, and despite everything, a tiny smile touched her lips. The ceremony lasted less than 15 minutes. When Luca placed the ring on her finger, his touch was careful. When Isabella became Mrs. Luca Duca, there was no cheering crowd, only witnesses, security, and the quiet knowledge that by morning, Chicago would explode. It happened much faster. 27 minutes after the ceremony, Damien received a photograph, Luca and Isabella standing together, her wedding ring visible. Damien stared at it for a long time. Then he threw the phone across the room, because the woman he had abandoned in the snow hadn't crawled back. She hadn't disappeared. She hadn't been ruined. She had married his greatest enemy. But Damien's rage wasn't only jealousy. It was fear, because Isabella was now protected by Luca's name, and Luca had the envelope. Damien walked to a locked cabinet. Inside was a second black envelope. He removed it carefully. The papers Isabella stole were damaging, but they were incomplete. The real ledger was somewhere else, and it contained something even Luca didn't know. Damien smiled slowly. If Luca Duca wanted to turn Isabella Carter into his wife, fine. Damien would make sure their marriage became the very thing that destroyed them. A week later, Luca prepared to introduce Isabella publicly as his wife, not at a Mafia gathering at one of Chicago's most exclusive charity galas. It would be their first appearance together. Everyone would be watching. Isabella knew Damien would hear about it. She suspected he might even come. What she didn't know was that an invitation had already been delivered to him, and Damien Russo had accepted. Not because he wanted to congratulate the newlyweds, but because he was finally ready to tell Isabella something about Luca Duca, something that could make her question whether being found in that snow had really been an accident at all. The gala was held inside one of Chicago's oldest private hotels. Gold chandeliers, marble floors, champagne flowing beneath crystal light. Politicians smiled beside businessmen. Businessmen smiled beside men whose names never appeared on company documents. And when Luca Duca entered with Isabella on his arm, the room changed. Not loudly. Nobody gasped. Nobody pointed. But conversations slowed. Heads turned. Whispers traveled faster than the music because everyone knew exactly who Isabella Carter had almost married, and everyone knew who she had married instead. Luca felt the attention immediately. He was used to it. Isabella wasn't. Her fingers tightened slightly around his arm. Luca glanced down. She looked stunning. Her gown was deep burgundy, elegant, and fitted beautifully to her plus-size figure. Nothing about it tried to hide her. Nothing about Isabella did anymore. The woman Luca had found, curled beneath snow outside a chapel, was gone. In her place stood someone with her shoulders back, her head raised, and the Duca name attached to hers. Luca leaned slightly closer. "You can still leave." Isabella looked around the ballroom, then at him. No, that was all. Luca's mouth almost curved. They continued forward. The reaction was immediate. People approached to congratulate them. Some meant it. Most did not. Isabella recognized the difference quickly. Several women looked at her wedding ring before looking at her face. Men who once ignored her suddenly treated her carefully because Luca stood beside her. It should have irritated her. Instead, it taught her something. Power changed the way people looked at the same woman, and Isabella had decided she would never again confuse their respect for kindness. For nearly an hour, everything remained controlled. Then one woman made the mistake of mentioning Damien. Her smile was polite, her voice sweeter than necessary. She remarked that Isabella had certainly recovered quickly from such a humiliating wedding day. Luca's expression hardened, but before he could respond, Isabella did. She smiled, then calmly observed that recovering quickly was much easier when the person who abandoned you turned out to be the worst thing that almost happened to you. The woman had nothing to say after that. Luca did not smile until they walked away. Then Isabella felt the smallest movement in his chest. "You're laughing?" "No, you are barely." For a moment they forgot why they were there. That was becoming dangerous, because their marriage had begun as protection, then strategy, then revenge. But somewhere along the way, Luca had started watching Isabella even when nobody else was looking. And Isabella had started noticing the difference between Luca touching her, because people were watching, and Luca touching her, because, hey, she wanted to. His hand rested at the small of her back as they crossed the ballroom. It stayed there longer than necessary. Then Isabella stopped across the room. Damien Rousseau had arrived. The air seemed to disappear from her lungs. He stood beneath one of the chandeliers, wearing a perfectly tailored navy suit, calm, clean, untouched, as though he had never left a woman freezing outside a chapel. As though he hadn't spent the last week threatening her family. Damien lifted a glass toward her, a greeting almost playful. Isabella's body went rigid. Luca noticed immediately. His gaze followed hers. Every trace of warmth vanished from his face. Damien smiled, then disappeared into the crowd. Luca wanted to follow. Isabella stopped him with a hand against his arm. "Not here. Not yet." Luca understood, but the rest of the evening changed. He remained closer to Isabella. Marco and the guards shifted positions around the ballroom. Every door was watched. Every unfamiliar face became a possible threat. Damien had come for something. The question was, what? They didn't wait long to find out. 20 minutes later, Isabella stepped away from Luca to visit the ladies' lounge. She never reached it. Damien appeared near a quieter corridor connecting the ballroom to the private gardens. He didn't touch her. He was too smart for that. He simply stood in her path. Isabella stopped. There had been a time when Damien's presence could make her second-guess herself. Not anymore. He looked at her ring, then laughed quietly. The sound made her skin crawl. "You work fast." Isabella didn't respond. Damien stepped closer. He congratulated her, then asked whether Luca had told her everything. That got her attention. Damien saw it. His smile deepened. He reminded Isabella that Luca had spent years hunting him, years watching his finances, years tracking his movements. Then Damien asked one question. How exactly had Luca happened to be driving past that chapel in the middle of a blizzard? On the same day, Damien's wedding collapsed. Isabella's stomach tightened. Damien noticed. He kept going. He suggested Luca had been watching the chapel, that he knew Damien would be there, that perhaps Luca had expected something to happen, maybe even caused it. The thought was poisonous, because it was believable enough to hurt. Luca had spent years tracking Damien. Luca had known details about his businesses, and Luca had appeared at exactly the right place. Damien leaned closer. He told Isabella that Luca didn't rescue her. He collected her. The envelope, the bride, the humiliation, everything Luca needed to finally destroy him. Then Damien stepped back. He didn't need to say more. The damage had been done. He walked away. Isabella remained in the corridor. Her heart was beating too fast. She hated herself for allowing the doubt in. But once it entered, it spread. What if Luca had been following Damien that day? What if he knew the chapel mattered? What if her rescue wasn't coincidence? What if every act of protection afterward had begun with strategy? She turned. Luca was standing at the other end of the corridor. His face told her he had seen Damien leave. He approached. "Did he touch you?" "No." Luca looked past her. Damien was already gone. Then Luca saw Isabella's expression. Something was wrong. Not fear, distance. For the first time since their wedding, she stepped away when Luca reached for her. That hurt more than he expected. "What did he say?" Isabella looked at him and asked the question Damien wanted her to ask. "Why were you at that chapel?" Silence. Luca understood instantly. Damien had found the one piece of truth Luca had never explained. Isabella saw the hesitation. Her chest tightened. "Luca," he looked at her, then told her. He had been following Damien's financial movements that week. One of his companies had transferred money shortly before the wedding. Luca suspected Damien was preparing to flee Chicago. So yes, his convoy had been in that area because of Damien. Isabella felt something break inside her, but Luca wasn't finished. He had not known Isabella was in danger. He had not known about the envelope. He had not known Damien would abandon her. He had been driving toward one of Damien's properties when he passed the chapel. If the wind hadn't moved her veil, he might never have seen her. Isabella wanted to believe him. But Damien had chosen his poison carefully. Luca's truth sounded too close to Damien's lie. Luca saw that, and for once he didn't know how to fix it. They left the gala early. The ride home was silent. The distance between them felt larger than the entire back seat. Neither touched the other. When they reached the estate, Isabella went upstairs. Luca didn't stop her. He went to his study instead. And for the first time since their marriage, the adjoining door between their rooms remained closed. Damien's second move came before dawn. Marco entered Luca's study, carrying a file. This time he looked genuinely unsettled. A body had been found near the river. The man had worked for Damien for 11 years. More importantly, he was the man seen arguing with Damien inside the chapel on Isabella's wedding day. The same man who had handed Damien the black envelope. dead single gunshot execution style. Luca stared at the photograph. Damon was cleaning up, which meant the ledger mattered more than anyone realized. Then Marco revealed something worse. The dead man's phone had been recovered. Most of it had been wiped, but one message survived. It had been sent to Richard Carter shortly before the wedding. Only 6 words. She must never see the second ledger. Luca stood. The second ledger. Damien had mentioned none of that, neither had Richard and Isabella. Luca suddenly remembered something. The fear on her face when she stopped telling the chapel story. There was still something she had hidden. Luca went upstairs. He found Isabella awake. She was sitting beside the window. The black envelope rested on the table. He placed the photograph of the dead man beside it. Isabella's face changed immediately. She knew him. Luca saw it. Then he placed the recovered message beside the photograph. Isabella went pale. The silence answered everything. You knew there was another ledger. She closed her eyes. Luca's voice remained quiet. Where is it? Isabella finally told him the part she had been too frightened to reveal. Inside the chapel, after Damien caught her listening, she had heard Damien arguing with the dead man. The man accused Damien of keeping 2 sets of records, one for laundering, one for everything else: bribes, murders, payoffs, police, judges, politicians, and one entry connected directly to Gabriel Duca. The first envelope held only fragments. The second ledger held the entire network. Damien had realized Isabella heard them. That was why she had been dragged outside. That was why he couldn't simply allow her to leave. But Isabella had escaped his grip long enough to hide the first envelope beneath her dress. Then something unexpected happened. Her father intervened. Richard convinced Damien not to kill Isabella outright. He promised she would freeze before reaching the road. No bullet, no body obviously connected to Damien. Just a runaway bride lost in a storm. Isabella's voice broke when she admitted it. Her own father had helped leave her there. Luca's face became deadly still, but Isabella continued. The second ledger had been hidden inside the chapel before everyone fled. She saw where. Luca stared at her. Where? Isabella looked toward the snow outside. Inside the altar, they returned to the chapel before sunrise. Luca would not let Isabella go alone. She wouldn't let him leave her behind. The place looked different now, quieter. The storm had passed, but Isabella still felt the cold the moment she stepped from the SUV. Her body remembered before her mind did. Luca noticed her stop. He didn't say anything. He simply extended his hand. Isabella looked at it, then took it. Together, they entered. The chapel smelled of damp stone and old wood. Broken decorations still remained from the abandoned wedding. Wilted flowers, white ribbon, one overturned chair. Evidence of a celebration that never happened. Isabella led Luca toward the altar. Behind a carved wooden panel near the base, she found the compartment empty. Her face fell. Damien had beaten them. Then Luca saw something scratched into the wood. A number, 6 digits. Isabella recognized them. A storage locker. Damien used a private vault company downtown. The ledger wasn't gone. It had been moved. And now they knew where. But as Luca and Isabella turned toward the chapel doors, headlights appeared outside. Several vehicles, too many. Luca's hand moved beneath his coat. Marco's voice crackled through his earpiece. We've got company. Isabella looked through the stained glass window. Damien had come. And this time he hadn't come to talk. The first shot shattered one of the chapel windows. Luca pulled Isabella down immediately. Glass exploded across the stone floor. His guards returned fire from outside. The quiet chapel became chaos. Isabella's breathing turned sharp. For one terrible second, she was back in the snow, helpless, cold, waiting to die. Then Luca grabbed her hand. "Stay with me." She looked at him, and the panic stopped controlling her. They moved behind the stone altar. Luca assessed the situation quickly. Damien had brought 6 men, maybe more. 2 vehicles blocked the road. Another waited near the side entrance. This wasn't intimidation. Damien had decided to end everything. Isabella, Luca, the ledger, all of it. Luca's men were better trained, but Damien had numbers, and the chapel had too many open angles. Luca could hear gunfire outside, then silence, then another burst. Isabella looked toward the side door. She remembered something, a narrow service passage used by priests. It led beneath the chapel and exited near the old cemetery wall. She told Luca he hesitated. Leaving his men wasn't natural to him, but protecting Isabella came first. They moved. The passage was barely wide enough for one person. Dark, cold, dusty. Isabella went first. Luca followed directly behind. They emerged behind the chapel. For several seconds, they had cover. Then Damien stepped from behind a stone monument. Gun raised. Isabella froze. Luca moved in front of her. Damien smiled. Even now, even cornered, he still looked arrogant. But something was different. His suit was dirty. His face was exhausted. His empire was collapsing. The polished man Isabella had almost married was finally cracking. Damien demanded the location of the ledger. Luca said nothing. Damien pointed the gun toward Isabella instead. That changed Luca. His posture shifted. Not much, but Isabella felt it. Damien saw it too, and smiled. There it was, the weakness he had been searching for. He mocked Luca for falling in love with the woman he originally rescued for revenge. Luca didn't deny it. That surprised Isabella. Damien kept pushing. He reminded Luca of Gabriel, of the years Luca had wasted hunting him, of everything he had lost. Then he offered to trade Isabella for the ledger. Luca actually laughed quietly. Damien's smile faded because he suddenly understood. There was no version of this where Luca handed Isabella over. Not anymore. Damien raised the gun. Before he could fire, Isabella moved. She kicked snow hard toward his face. Damien flinched. Luca crossed the distance instantly. Then fired into the air. They collided. The fight was brutal and short. Luca drove Damien against the stone wall. The gun fell. Damien reached for it. Isabella got there first. She picked it up. Her hands shook, but she held it. Damien looked at her. For the first time, he seemed afraid of her. Luca pinned him against the wall. Everything he had wanted for years was finally within reach. Gabriel, the betrayal, the ambush, the dead informants, the threats, Isabella freezing outside the chapel. One movement, and Damien Rousseau would be finished. Luca's hand tightened around Damien's throat. Damien smiled through the pressure because this was what he wanted. He wanted Luca to kill him, to become exactly what revenge had been turning him into. Isabella saw it. Luca. He didn't move. She stepped closer. Her voice remained calm. He's already lost. Luca looked at her. She lowered the gun slightly. Damien had lost his businesses, his allies, his money, his bride. Soon, the ledger would take whatever remained. Killing him here wouldn't give Gabriel back. It wouldn't erase the chapel. It would only turn Damien into the final decision Luca ever made for revenge. Luca stared at the man he had hated for years. Then, slowly, he released him. Damien collapsed into the snow. He coughed, stunned. Luca looked down at him. "You're not worth what she would lose." That was the moment Damien understood. He hadn't simply lost the war. He had been replaced. Revenge no longer owned Luca. Isabella did not own him either. But loving her had given Luca something revenge never could. A reason to stop. Sirens sounded in the distance. Not police, federal agents. Marco had contacted a task force through one of Luca's legitimate attorneys after obtaining copies of the first ledger. Damien looked toward the road. His face drained. Luca had planned ahead. For once, Damien had nowhere left to run. The second ledger was recovered from the private vault that morning. It was worse than they expected. Names, dates, payments, photographs, recordings, evidence connecting Damien to years of corruption, trafficking, bribery, and multiple murders. Gabriel Duca's ambush was there too. The payment, the route, the names of everyone involved, including Richard Carter. Luca finally had proof. Not rumor, not suspicion. Proof. Richard agreed to cooperate in exchange for consideration for his role. Isabella didn't defend him. She loved her father, but love no longer meant pretending his choices were harmless. Her sister was removed from his financial control. Carter Logistics entered a legitimate restructuring process. And for the first time in Isabella's adult life, her future did not depend on saving her father's mistakes. Damien was arrested before sunset. News cameras captured him being led from a federal building. The man who had spent years controlling everyone around him could no longer control the story. But Luca didn't watch the coverage. He was upstairs outside Isabella's room. The door between their chambers was still closed. Damien's words at the gala had done damage, and Luca knew defeating Damien didn't automatically repair it. He knocked. Isabella opened the door. For several seconds, they simply looked at each other. Then Luca told her the truth, all of it. Yes. He had been following Damien's movements on the day of the wedding. Yes, when he first understood who Isabella was, part of him recognized immediately that saving her could hurt Damien. He wasn't going to insult her by pretending revenge had never entered his mind, but he also told her something Damien could never understand. Luca stopped the SUV before he saw Isabella's face, before he knew who she was, before he knew what she was holding. He stopped because there was a woman lying in the snow. That was it. Everything after that changed him. The envelope had been useful. The marriage had started strategically, but Isabella had never become a possession. She had become the one person whose opinion of Luca mattered more than Damien's destruction. Isabella listened, then asked one question. If there had been no envelope, would you still have taken me home? Luca didn't hesitate. Yes, that was the answer she needed. She stepped closer. The distance between them disappeared. This time, when Luca kissed her, there was no audience, no gala, no Damien, no strategy, no contract, only them. And when Isabella opened the adjoining door between their rooms that night, neither of them closed it again. Weeks later, winter finally began to loosen its grip on Chicago. Snow still covered parts of the countryside, but the roads were clear. Luca took Isabella back to the chapel. No guards stood close enough to hear them. No enemies waited inside. No wedding guests, just the two of them. Isabella walked toward the iron gate, where Luca had found her. She stopped. For several seconds, she stared at the ground. There was no snowdrift now, no frozen veil, no black envelope, only quiet. Luca stood behind her. He didn't touch her until she reached for his hand first. Isabella looked at the chapel. Once she had believed this place marked the end of her life. The bride Damien abandoned, the daughter her father sacrificed, the woman everyone would pity. She wasn't any of those things anymore. She turned toward Luca. Their marriage had begun as an unexpected choice, a calculated alliance, a weapon against a shared enemy. But somewhere between the snow, the secrets, the threats, and the truth, the weapon became a home. Luca looked toward the place where he'd first seen white fabric beneath the storm. He had spent years believing destroying Damian Russo would finally give him peace. It hadn't. Letting go had Isabella squeezed his hand. Then they walked away from the chapel together. Damian Russo had left his bride in the cold, believing she would disappear. Instead, she survived. She exposed him. She became stronger than the woman he had tried to destroy, and she became the wife of the one man he feared most. But that wasn't the greatest revenge. The greatest revenge was something Damien would never understand. Luca Duca stopped living for his enemy. Isabella Carter stopped living for everyone else's expectations. And together, they built a life Damian Russo could never touch. Because sometimes the most unexpected choice isn't saving your enemy's bride, or even marrying her. Sometimes it's realizing that after years of revenge, love is the one victory your enemy can never take away.